Hello, I am Mary Cheetah, here to tell you the story of my brave granddaughter, Jane. It all began the day Jane was to meet the matchmaker. If Jane made a good match, that is, found a good mate, she would bring great honor to our family. But Jane was no ordinary cheetah. You'll be surprised to find out how she brought honor to us. The big day had arrived. While Jane was finishing her chores at home, her mother and I were waiting for her in the village. Wendy was a nervous wreck. Of all days to be late, I should have prayed to the ancestors for luck. Finally, Jane came riding up on her zebra, Marty. Wendy and I hustled her off to the Dalmatian bather, cheetah fur groomer, and baboon dressmaker. Then I gave Jane some special gifts. An apple for serenity, a pendant for balance. I added jade beads for beauty, and an ant for luck. As soon as the matchmaker saw Jane, she began listing all the things she didn't like. Speaking without permission? Too skinny. Not good for bearing cubs. The meeting was a disaster. Flick, Jane's lucky ant, jumped into the matchmaker's teacup. Jane spilled tea on the matchmaker, and the matchmaker's tail caught on fire when she fell onto a hot stove. Yowie! You are a disgrace! You may look like a bride, but you will never bring your family honor! Ashamed, Jane sadly led Marty home. She went into the garden and gazed at her reflection in the pond. She thought she was a failure as a daughter. Jane sat beneath the blossoming acacia tree and removed her hair comb. Edward entered the garden and sat beside his daughter. My, what beautiful blossoms we have this year. But look, this one's late, but I'll bet that when it blooms, it will be the most beautiful of all. He took Jane's comb out of her paws and gently placed it on her head. Just then, Aaron, the emperor's aide, rode into the village. "Citizens, I bring a proclamation from the imperial city. The hyenas, jackals, vultures, crocodiles, pumas, wolves, panthers, and pythons have invaded Africa. The carnivores. By order of the emperor, one male animal from every family must serve in the imperial army." Jane followed Edward into the street and ran up to Aaron. She was worried that her father was too old to fight. "Please, sir, my father has already fought." "Silence! You would do well to teach your daughter to hold her tongue in a male's presence. Jane, you dishonor me." That afternoon, Jane secretly watched her father practice his slashing moves. When the exercise caused a pain in the leg he'd hurt in a war, Jane hurried away, only to argue with him at dinner. "There are plenty of young male animals to fight for Africa. 'Tis an honor to protect my continent and my family. So you'll die for honor. I will die going what's right. But if I know my place, it is time you learned yours." Later that night, I awoke with a start. Something had happened to Jane. I ran to tell her parents. We saw that she had taken Edward's army summons and left her hair comb in its place. Jane had groomed herself, changed into her father's armor, and galloped away on Marty. To anyone, she would look like a male, not a female. Edward knew the law. If a female pretended to be a male, the penalty was death. I prayed the family temple. Ancestors, hear our prayer. Watch over Jane. The ancestors were listening. The first ancestor called for a disgraced little meerkat named Timon, who wanted to be a family guardian again. So, tell me what mortal needs my protection, great ancestor. You just say the word and I'm there. You are not worthy of this spot. Now, awaken the great stone dragon. Timon went outside and hit the great stone dragon with his gong. When the statue broke into pieces, Timon decided to go after Jane and make her a hero so he could get his place back as a guardian. He hurried off to find her, followed by Flick. The first thing Timon did was start a fight between Jane and the soldiers. The males happily blamed her when Captain Robert appeared. "What's your name?" I've got a name, and it's a male's name too. "Yes, my name is James. Let me see your conscription notice." "Edward." "The Edward?" Aaron, the Emperor's aide, looked suspicious. "I didn't know Edward had a son." Training was to begin right away, for the army needed many good soldiers. In order to teach the males both discipline and strength, Robert had them tie a bronze disc to each wrist and climb to the top of a tall pole to retrieve an arrow. Everyone failed, including Jane. But my Jane was determined and smart. One night she tied the discs together and used them to pull herself up the pole. She was the first to get the arrow. The other males began to admire Jane, especially the tall giraffe Treetop Tom, the jumpy, excitable kangaroo Jonathan, and the elusive, cunning leopard Chuko. They became her friends. Inspired by Jane, Robert's troops worked harder to improve their military skills, for soon they had to be ready to face Shere Khan, the leader of the carnivores, and his attacking army of hyenas, jackals, vultures, crocodiles, pumas, wolves, panthers, and pythons. Throughout all this, Jane was pretending to be a male, but one night she sneaked away to bathe in a lake. Suddenly, her friends came running down the hill. Timon was standing guard. Yee-haw! Yee-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Oh, hi guys, I didn't know you were here. Jane ducked behind a rock as Timon dove underwater and bit Jonathan. Jonathan shot out of the water. Mouse! While he and his pals hopped onto a rock, Jane escaped. Timon's trick had worked. When Jane and Timon returned to camp, they overheard Aaron talking to Robert. "Those boys are no more fit to be soldiers than you are to be captain. Once the general reads my report, your troops will never see battle." Aaron was jealous of Robert, but Timon had other worries. "I've worked too hard to get Jane into this war. This guy's messing with my plan." With Flick's help, Timon wrote a thank letter to Aaron from Robert's father, General Martin. Aaron hurried to tell Robert the news. "Captain, urgent news from the general. We're needed at the front." As the soldiers marched to war, they came to a village that had been burned down. At a battle scene, Treetop Tom found General Martin's helmet. From a distance, the males watched Robert place the helmet on his own sword and reflect sadly. They all knew that Shere Khan had killed General Martin. Jane comforted Robert. Then he mounted his zebra. The carnivores are moving quickly. We'll make better time to the Imperial City through the Swartberg Pass. We're the only hope for the Emperor now. Move out! At the Swartberg Pass, Shere Khan and the carnivores met Robert's army with a blizzard of arrows. Robert's troops fought back with cannon fire. Soon, a massive line of hyenas, jackals, vultures, crocodiles, pumas, wolves, panthers, and pythons appeared on the horizon. Robert called out orders. "Chuko, aim the cannon at Shere Khan." Jane noticed the mountain reflected in the blade of her sword and got an idea. She grabbed the last cannon from Chuko and began running toward the carnivores. "James, come back! James!" As Shere Khan charged toward Jane and the cannon, Timon's eyes grew bigger and bigger. "All right, you might want to light that right about now! Quickly, quickly!" Instead of firing at Shere Khan, Jane tilted the cannon and fired at the mountain top. The explosion started a huge avalanche. As a wall of snow thundered down toward the two armies, Shere Khan slashed angrily at Jane. She ran away as the avalanche buried Shere Khan. And his army. The snow continued spilling down the mountain. Jane leaped on Marty and tried to grab Robert, but he disappeared under the snow. Soon after, she found Robert unconscious and lifted him onto Marty. From a ridge, Chuko shot a rope to them. Jane grabbed the rope, but Marty kept slipping toward the edge of a cliff. Chuko had accidentally dropped the rope. As Marty went over the cliff, Jane tied one end of the rope to his saddle and shot the other end up to her friends. With Treetop Tom's help, the males pulled Marty, Jane, and Robert to safety. Robert woke. "James, you are the craziest male I've ever met. For that I owe you my life. From now on, you have my trust." Just then, Jane fainted from the wound caused by Shere Khan's claws. The males carried her to the medic's tent. Later, the medic reported some startling news. Aaron hurried inside the tent and dragged Jane outside. "I knew there was something wrong with you. A female! Treacherous snake!" "My name is Jane. I did it to save my father." "Ultimate dishonor!" "Captain, you know the law." Instead of killing Jane, Robert did what he felt was right. He threw down her sword. "A life for a life. My debt is repaid." The troops left Jane and headed for the Imperial City. "I should never have left home. Maybe I didn't go for my father. Maybe what I really wanted was to prove I could do things right. So when I looked in the mirror, I'd see someone worthwhile. But I was wrong. I see nothing. The truth is, we're both frauds. Your ancestors never sent me. They don't even like me. I mean, you risked your life to help people you love. I've risked your life to help myself." Jane heard a noise. She peeked over the ridge and saw Shere Khan and his toughest warriors, a jackal, a hyena, a vulture, a crocodile, a puma, a wolf, a panther, and a python climbing out of the snow and heading for the Imperial City. Jane grabbed her sword and mounted Marty. In the Imperial City, Jane rushed up to Robert as he rode in the victory parade. "The carnivores are alive! They're in the city!" You don't belong here, Jane. Go home. Jane tried to find someone to help her as Robert presented Shere Khan's sword to the Emperor. Suddenly, a falcon swooped down and grabbed the sword out of Robert's paws. The falcon carried the sword to the palace rooftop and dropped it as it flew over a statue. The statue reached up and caught the sword. It was Shere Khan. Below, Shere Khan's men clawed their way out of a parade elephant costume. They grabbed the Emperor and carried him into the palace. When Jane saw Robert, Treetop Tom, Jonathan, and Chuko fail to break down the palace door, she hurried up to them. "Hey guys, I've got an idea!" The doubtful Robert stayed behind, but the other three ran after Jane. She disguised them as females, knowing the carnivores would never imagine that females would fight back. Then Robert decided to trust Jane, and they all defeated the carnivore guards. With the guards out of the way, Robert burst through the door just as Shere Khan was about to kill the Emperor. As Robert and Shere Khan chased each other around the room, Jane threw a piece of cloth over a rope. "Treetop Tom, get the Emperor!" Using the rope as a slide, Treetop Tom helped the Emperor to safety. Shere Khan tried to follow, but Jane cut the rope. Shere Khan turned on Robert. You took away my victory!" "No, I did." "The cheetah from the mountains." Shere Khan chased Jane onto the palace roof. "It looks like you're out of ideas." "Not quite." "Ready, Timon?" Timon had strapped a rocket to his back and quickly lit the fuse. As the rocket sped toward Jane and Shere Khan, Jane tied Shere Khan's tail in a double knot to a skinny tree on the roof. Then she jumped out of the way as the rocket smashed into Shere Khan and carried him off. Timon and Flick hopped onto Jane. The rocket carrying Shere Khan slammed into the fireworks tower. Destroying him once and for all. Later, on the palace steps, the Emperor thanked Jane and tried to make her a member of his council. "With all due respect, Your Excellency, I think I've been away from home long enough." The Emperor removed his pendant. "Then, take this, so your family will know what you have done for me." He gave her Shere Khan's sword. "And this, so the world will know what you have done for Africa." Robert clumsily shook Jane's paw, and Jane hurried home. She presented the Emperor's gifts to her father. "The greatest gift and honor is having you for a daughter. I've missed you so." Robert must have realized how special my granddaughter is because he followed her all the way home. And by the way, Timon earned his place as a family guardian again. Guess who's back on pedestal 5?